Picture a dense, untouched coastal forest. Now imagine a fleet of industrial excavators tearing through that tree line to clear space for a new mega-resort. Developers will point to the thousands of jobs and millions in tax revenue the project guarantees. The trade-off is the likely collapse of the local coastal reef system. Once thousands of tons of concrete are poured into a fragile ecosystem, the damage is permanent. You cannot unpave a wetland. The central problem in large-scale infrastructure is developers frequently act first and discover the consequences later. How exactly do the decision-makers figure out what will happen to an environment before a single brick is laid? Moving forward without knowing the ecological outcome means betting the survival of ecosystems on pure guesswork. To stop environmental destruction before the shovels hit the dirt, planners require a reliable way to predict the future. This is exactly where the Environmental Impact Assessment, or EIA, steps in. The United Nations Environment Program defines the EIA as a specific tool used to identify the environmental, social, and economic impacts of a project well before any final decisions are made. It operates as a mandatory simulation, letting developers run the tape forward to see the specific damage they might cause. We can see exactly how this works by looking at the sustainable tourism industry. Long before construction crews arrive, an EIA team gathers intensive data on the current state of the local land, water, and wildlife. This diagram models different futures. First, Alternative A predicts standard, disruptive construction methods, causing a severe drop in biodiversity. Next, Alternative B tests modified, eco-friendly actions. Once chosen, the assessment generates specific guidelines to manage the environment during the build. By following these calculated adjustments, planners actively neutralize the most harmful ecological threats. The physical layout of the resort, the materials used, and the waste systems are reshaped to fit harmoniously into the local habitat. By providing these data points, the assessment moves beyond a simple checklist and provides the technical framework to reshape the project's blueprint for a sustainable design. Beyond running simulations, the EIA serves as a strict bureaucratic gatekeeper in the planning process. The sequence of events is rigid. Local governments will not grant legal planning permission for a new tourism project until the entire environmental assessment is completely finished. Placing this mandatory hurdle at the very front of the timeline locks ecological considerations into the earliest stages of decision-making. Despite this comprehensive design, the EIA is operating under a severe structural handicap. Policy experts point out a major limitation in how the tool is legally classified. An EIA is strictly defined as a policy of information. It provides data to aid decision-making, but it is not a binding regulatory law. This distinction creates a massive loophole. Developers and politicians receive a highly detailed warning about the damage a project will cause, but they are often not legally required to stop the project. This lack of regulatory power severely hinders the actual enforcement of the sustainable practices outlined in the report. An EIA maps out potential ecological disasters with perfect clarity, but it functions as a guide, not a guard. It lacks the legal teeth to forcibly pull the plug. There is also a second vulnerability tied to the science of prediction itself. Forecasting events that haven't occurred yet always introduces an element of inaccuracy. The models used in an EIA can easily overestimate the resilience of a local water supply or underestimate the disruption to migratory wildlife. These built-in margins of error routinely foster mistrust among stakeholders, giving politicians an excuse to ignore the data entirely. The Environmental Impact Assessment remains an indispensable compass for navigating infrastructure growth, but data alone cannot protect an ecosystem. True preservation depends entirely on the willingness of human decision-makers to actually heed the warnings.